Whatto chaps, I'm MagicalMike, and recently I was provided with a key for a game called Strange Antiquities, so thank you for that, with no strings attached, not sponsored, so naturally I can say anything I like and I wouldn't have it any other way. So let's do just that. If you're interested, then sit down and chill with the cosy ambiance of this magic trinket shop's atmosphere. Like and subscribe and stuff. Also, be aware that there may be spoilers for a number of puzzles for the first maybe half of the game in the background, so if you don't want answers to stuff, then stick this in another tab or something. Strange Antiquities is a puzzle game, a fairly decently length one. It took me just under 12 hours to finish it, and that was with me being extra thorough in a bunch of processes. You're a thaumaturge's apprentice that gets put in charge of a shop that sells, well, a bunch of strange magical trinkets. Unfortunately for you, none of them have any labels attached, and it's up to you to figure out what all of these random items actually are, what they do, and who to give them to. You're put in charge of a load of shelves full of interesting items, a couple of potted plants, a clock, a very unintrusive UI that shows the current day and your something meter. The symbols on it have meaning that you'll get to figure out just a bit later on. There's some candles, a table that makes no sense, a locked cage, a set of scales, a rotating handle that pops up something, a bell that summons your next customer, and, most importantly, a cat. The game does a fairly hands-off job of explaining things off the bat, which would normally sound like a bad thing, but since there's only a limited number of things to fiddle with at first, it's actually nice to have the freedom to just touch stuff and see what you can do. You'll find that there's not a lot that you can do at first, but you can pet Jupiter, which scores easy points for me. However, sooner or later you'll ding the bell and you'll summon Eli, your boss, as your first NPC. He'll chat with you about where he's off gallivanting to, hand you your first book, Strange Artifacts, and warn you not to touch anything at all. So, of course, we're going to go and touch everything, including the drawers that he's just mentioned. NPCs only show up one at a time, and only when you click the bell. There is no looming time limit on anything, and each day lasts as long as you want it to. There's 18 days in total for the game's story, with a final one afterwards as an epilogue that lets you identify all your remaining items, which I found was quite a nice touch. So NPCs will show up, generally give some story updates for overarching stuff, or just explain what they're looking for and ask you to hand an item over. There's no voice acting, and most of the game relies on you reading information and using logical deduction to work stuff out anyway, so there's quite a bit of light reading here. So using your handy-dandy new book, you'll be able to read about a number of artifacts. Various clues about their descriptions can be used to cross-reference the physical items on the shop's shelves, and that's up to you to work out. You can do so by picking something up and using the controls to get descriptions based on looking at an item's colour and composition, touching different parts of it, smelling and listening to things, and getting an inner perception check, which is pretty much just what kind of vibe the thing gives off. Sometimes the info you get is useless or nothing, sometimes it can be very helpful, it all depends. The Hunter's Boon, for example, describes simple, non-embellished items made from trophies taken from slain beasts, and since we start with such a limited number of items, it's fairly obvious which of those it could be. By handing the right item over to an NPC, you'll identify it properly, tick it off in the book and be told directly which evidence should have clued you in to the correct thing, which is a neat detail for me. It was satisfying to have my logic checked in real time and reinforced when I made the right deductions. The item also gets replaced on the shelves too every time you hand these things over, so you won't accidentally run out of anything in case you're worried about doing that. Whenever you get something right, you're usually rewarded with more pages for the artifact book, which will further help ID more stuff as you go. I think there were roughly 30 to 40 items in total. I never actually counted them, so there's quite a wide variety of things. Sometimes these NPCs will give you direct requests for items, sometimes they don't actually know what they need and it's your job to work out what best to help them out with. Sometimes you'll get a bunch of new pages for your book, sometimes you might get more items in trade. Sometimes you'll just get given stuff for free, and other times it might be just the postman arriving with the mail. As you play, you'll also be given the ability to explore the town map. Not physically, you can just click on buildings to travel to them in a choose-your-own-adventure kind of way, but if you do that with no purpose, you'll accrue insanity progress, which is that bar on the bottom right that fills up in that UI. The same happens if you hand over incorrect items to customers, and if it fills completely, you get to do some strange little dice game in order to empty the bar and have another go at things. Ultimately, I found this dice game element pretty pointless and not very well explained, honestly. I never actually triggered the insanity by failing too much, but I did it on purpose for an achievement after I beat the game, and I just kind of thought it was a bit superfluous. Anyway, if you do have reason to explore the town map, through various notes and letters you might get during the days, then by figuring out those clues and riddles, you might find even more artifacts to identify. At the end of each day, you'll also get a part of an ominous story and a special riddle card to solve, which could point to all sorts of things that you'll need to work out. The maps also expand as you go, and you'll get access to a few locations before the game ends. And along with that, so does the shop, the books and information you can learn from them, the interactions that you can have with artifacts in order to discern their identities, and the overall complexity of the puzzle aspect increases steadily. While you can't physically rotate or manipulate the artifacts themselves in that specific menu, which is a bit of a shame, I'll admit, you will become aware of a number of things that you can do with them. The candles might tell you a few things about some items, the scales might help you work out how heavy things are, obviously, but since we're dealing with magic, then perhaps not so obviously, eh? And there's a few other niche interactions that are alluded to on several pages of the artifact book, but I don't want to spoil them because they're rather unique and made me feel a little bit clever for trying stuff out, and I don't want to rob you of that experience. To further help you out with all that stuff, you'll find a book that details a ton of symbology, one that talks about gemstones and their thaumic properties, a book on curses, and, if you're diligent enough, a special lens that lets you understand invisible thaumic fields. None of which is particularly explained all that well to you. The game hopes that you'll be inquisitive enough to play with stuff and work these things out for yourself. This was most of the fun for me, slowly fiddling with arcane nonsense until something clicked, sometimes literally, and suddenly having a little understanding to work with in order to logic my way through how the tools worked properly. It was a greatly satisfying thing to go from being absolutely clueless to actually learning the rules to the point where I was able to just dish out the correct artifacts to people like candy on the final few days, like I'd actually become an expert in this made-up field. Proper immersion, that. There is a few choices you get to make along the way as well, and a number of slightly branching paths that affect your endings. You're able to replay any day you like, so getting a number of endings is possible, and I was able to get at least 4 of them, though one was labelled number 9, so it looks like there's quite a fair few endings that you can change. Though ultimately it doesn't seem like some of them have any major variation to them. It's like there's a few main endings, and a few subplots that can mildly diverge within those main endings. These things weren't anything truly impressive to me, but for what the gameplay was, they did offer up some unique puzzles even right at the end that tested my knowledge and ability to adapt on the fly, and I thought that they were alright. There was a few things I struggled with here and there, some that I've mentioned already, but being able to scroll through the many pages of your books much faster would be a great addition. Being able to leave the pages open while you rattle through the shelves of your shop would be ever so helpful. Being able to label items with multiple symbols instead of just the single one, so you can explain which of them are Diurnic or Selenic, which unusual marking on them have some specific meanings, would also be quite helpful. Giving the gem and symbology books a contents bookmark to quick select would be quite nice as well, rather than having to flick through every single page constantly to spot the difference between a topaz or an amber gem, a Wiccan symbol or a material symbol. There's quite a lot of pages in these books. I ended up actually having to make my own notes along with the game's material. Here's one of those absolute messes that I created, but to be honest, I recommend doing as much because it's kind of fun to do that anyway, and having physical notes is just that extra bit special in a game like this. I greatly struggled with some of the map clues in particular that involved matching landmarks, but perhaps that's just a skill issue. And ultimately I think I had to look up 2 or 3 things across the whole game. One clue mentions a specific direction that just completely bamboozled me in the second map, and if you know what I'm talking about then you know. And some of the deductive processes for a handful of items were a little bit vague for me, leaving me to guess between 1 or 2 items that fit the bill sometimes instead of just having a completely clear answer. It never caused an insanity dice game though, so maybe that's a fine balance too. I particularly liked the witch's finger item when I finally worked out what that was. One of many satisfying "oh right, of course" moments. The game's full of those. Overall, Strange Antiquities has a really nice, chill vibe to it. It's cozy, the sound effects are mostly relaxing piano tones, and the rain falling against the window. Which also, it turns out, is a helpful mechanic too. There's nothing in the game here to jump scare you or pierce the ambience with some out-of-place nonsense. It doesn't try too hard to be too many things at once. It just sets out to be a simple puzzle game about weird magic stuff that you don't understand, while you slowly learn how to manage things and get a much better idea about them. And it doesn't outstay its welcome either, like quite a lot of games tend to do these days. 12 hours was a perfectly adequate amount of time for a completionist, and I'll bet it's about 7 or so if you rush through and do just the bare minimum. I do recommend this game if you're into the idea of fiddling around with a bunch of unknown magic trinkets. If you're the guy in your D&D group who gets excited about this kind of stuff, then Strange Antiquities is probably made for you. So, cheers for watching, cheers again for the key, and I'll see you guys next time.